So you've scouted, you've decided this is, whoa, I didn't see this land, I didn't think a land like this existed, I want. Now you press the button on I want.
Right.
What's the next stage?
So
how basically I'm asking, how do I start then?
Yeah, so now you get into the nitty-gritties of documentation, due diligence, and so on. So I'd say first thing you want to do is do your due diligence on the piece of land. Along with that, you will end up doing due diligence on the landowner. So basic things I like to look for when I'm checking out, that's what due diligence means. You're doing your research and making sure that you have all the information responsibly that you need to make a decision to pull the trigger by sending money to an escrow account and the likes. Is the land easily accessible? Where is it located relative to the closest road, the closest tarmac road? If it's far removed from the tarmac road, what kind of surface do I have to use to get to it off the tarmac? And for what distance? Is it going to be usable in the rainy season? Other aspects of that include the topography of the area. If it's near a water body, is it too close to the riparian zone? A place that would potentially get flooded over time?
Explain the riparian zone.
So riparian zones are spaces of land between the high water mark for water bodies, generally referred when you're discussing rivers, but also applicable when you're discussing lakes and oceans and seas and so on. Riparian is a buffer zone stipulated by law that one cannot own or develop even if they own.
Okay. Does Goshen Acquisition own any land that has to apply with this riparian laws?
Yes, absolutely. We have a beautiful 6.85 acre block of land at the front of Lake Elementaita, right next to Surville Resort, that we purchased in 2015. And yes, we do have a riparian buffer. Fortunately for Lake Elementaita, those were very well defined from a while ago. And that zone is managed by KWS. In fact, they manage the lake as part of their trustee duties for the benefit of the people of Kenya. And beyond that, there's a plan to propose extra buffers coming into the private lands where you cannot develop certain ways.
Okay, so when you are perfect, now that you're close to strategic land investment, aka a mass of water that has limited surface area, or call it length. When you went to get the land, when it came to riparian, who did you have a conversation with that with? How did you know?
So riparian lands are generally managed by the Water Resources Authority, formerly known as WARMA, now WRA, and in conjunction with them, in many cases you have to work with NEMA, the National Environmental Management Authority. But primarily WARMA is responsible for defining what the riparian zones are. They will do surveys, they have data, historical data about the ebb and flow of water levels, and therefore what buffer has to be put in place. And there's general guidelines. For instance, if it's a river, the riparian is automatically supposed to be a minimum of 6 meters on either side of the river. And if the river is wider than 6 meters, you're supposed to do double that, right? The width of the river on either side. So if the river is, say, 10 meters wide, you're supposed to leave 10 meters on either side, right? Up to 30 meters. So if the river is 50 meters wide, you're supposed to leave up to 30 meters on either side, right? So those are fairly clearly defined and generally apply to permanent rivers because those have permanent water. When you have seasonal rivers that are sometimes dry, sometimes wet, that's treated a bit differently, but all that is defined and managed by WARMA.
Okay. So they are the ones who then told you now KWS, and for this specific parcel of Elementaita that had a bit of difference because of the birds. I would guess. I'd say the animals that are in that space.
So in the instance that we're dealing with, Warma is specific to our proximity to the lake, the water body.
Okay.
So you deal with KWS because the lake happens to be managed by them because of all the wildlife around that ecosystem, specifically the bird life, right? So Lake Elementaita happens to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it's home to about 400 bird species, many of which you will not find anywhere else on the planet. So it's a protected zone, hence its UNESCO World Heritage listing. So there's responsibility by the national government and its agencies to manage that ecosystem responsibly, because it doesn't just affect the people local to the area or Kenya, it affects migratory routes spanning continents. Right, so it's for the benefit of humanity in general. That's very important. Now that's a double-edged sword. It has pluses and minuses. Pluses because it's unique, it's protected, it guarantees a certain amount of commercial viability around tourism for the long term, but it also comes with negatives around restrictions on what you can or can't do, especially if you're right next to the lake. So, you know, when you're doing your due diligence, these things will generally come up. If you do your due diligence right, which also includes hiring a licensed surveyor to do a survey report, to check the boundaries of the land as they were shown to you by the seller, to ensure that the boundaries are where they're supposed to be, the beacons are where they're supposed to be, and that the sizes match what the government has on record between paper and ground. And when you do that, a good licensed surveyor will pick up on issues of Warma, NEMA, blah, 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 riparian zones, and the likes.
Okay, so let's go back to this Imbuko land, because that's just the example that we're using in terms of how you did your DD. You've spotted this, you've talked about the proximity to the road. These are all things, all factors that you are considering before now, while you're in the process of deciding, I want this piece of land.
Yep.
So is that the stage where you hired the surveyor?
Yeah, so I generally hire the surveyor after I come to terms with the land seller. So I visited the land, I visited the site, I loved it. And some people ask me, what is it about the site that you liked and made you comfortable? And, you know, I tell people very bluntly, it's a feeling. Whether or not we like to admit it, most of our decisions in life are based on a feeling. It feels right, it feels safe, and there's a certain emotional attachment to it. The same goes for when you're buying a car, you're buying a watch, a timepiece, when you're buying your clothes. Yes, then they're well tailored, you like the color, blah, blah, blah. All that in totality gives you a feeling that you're willing to buy into. And it's exactly the same with land, maybe more important with land, because there's certain areas we've scouted for land where the land size was appropriate, the pricing was perfect, the documents were legitimate and clean, but I just didn't like the feeling. I didn't have that internal check. And so I walked away.
And all this other stuff was right.
Yes, I mean, you have to like the place.
Yeah.
So I always like to say it's a feeling.
Okay. Assuming
everything else checks out, because you could have the feeling, but the documents are all crooked. You know, the brothers of the guy who's selling the land.
In fact, let's go there. So you talked about doing due diligence on three different people: the land seller, or the land company if it's a land company.
Yes.
So let's start then with, because in your case it was you were buying this from the actual owner of the land, or the person who said they're the owner of the land.
Yes.
So how do you start doing the due diligence on the land seller in this case?